and welcome to our weekly book club episode of Homeschool Moms Unfiltered. I am your host, Megan, and my bookworm co-host is...
Hi, it's Amanda.
Hello. So this week, we'll be continuing our discussion of The Danish Way of Raising Teens by, oh gosh, I gave Amanda the author's name last week, and now she's paying me back by giving it to me this week. By Ibn de Singh Sandal. We're positive we've mispronounced that. She is Danish. We are not Danish. You get the hint, right? But it's written on the cover. The link is in our podcast description. You'll find the book. So, so come and hang out with us. If you do not have teens, don't leave us. It's all good. We promise. We'll explain. So I have teens, and while I think that my teens are absolutely awesome humans, the Danes are frequently ranked the happiest people in the world, right? It comes up time and time again on so many surveys. So I'm open to suggestions when it comes to strategies where we can implement, techniques for increased happiness, overall mental health, etc. And so that's why we have chosen this book. And we've done one episode already. So if you haven't caught it, you feel free to go back. But it's been an interesting read so far.
Yeah, no, totally. And I'll say I have a tween and I'm all about learning new things and improving my parenting strategies right now. So we have a happier, healthier home and family unit in the future. And on top of that, the author specifically says that while the title says teens right in it, it's really for any caregiver that is parenting kids going through changes. And I mean, honestly, I think that applies to basically all school-aged kids, right? Like, show me a school-aged kid that's not going through changes.
Yeah.
So that said, just because this is book club, that doesn't mean that you have to buy or even read the book, right? If you're happy to tune in and hear our recap, our takeaways, and our discussion, that totally works. Seriously, I just did this in our own parenting book club just this past week. I was like, this book, we're working on this other book, and I was like, this is not really my jam, and I was gonna read it and I had a bunch of other things come up and I just didn't get to it. So I'm just here to listen and see what you all think, and it motivated me to actually try to get some of the reading done, but I still haven't done any reading for next book club, so we'll see how that one goes. So yeah, we will not judge, right? I'm right there with you. If you just want to listen and hear what we have to say, you're welcome to.
Absolutely. If you do decide you'd like to read the book, we do have a link in the podcast description, as I mentioned, for you to find the book on Amazon. Full disclosure, it's an affiliate link. It doesn't cost you a penny more to use our affiliate link, but it does help support our podcast. And so we thank you in advance. We are not your podcasters / online people of whatever, I can't even call us influencers, but like people that are on the internet telling you like, go buy this thing, go buy that thing. And we've never bought the thing or used the thing or whatever, but we have a link for it. Literally, if we give you a link, it's something we're either reading or it's something that we're actively using in our homes. We are not those types of people on the internet. So thank you. We appreciate your support. So today we'll be discussing chapters 3 and 4. In this section of the reading, we look at the ideas of trust and formation, specifically trusting your teens and the idea of free play in the teen years, which I found truly fascinating, and how it helps form self-awareness and identity. So chapter 3 is called Trust, Rule Number 1. And we both had pretty much the same thought. What was your kickoff thought from this section, Amanda?
Right. So in the very first paragraph, she has this quote, right? It says, why is Denmark still ranked high when it comes to being one of the happiest countries in the world? One answer is found in the 6 areas described in the Danish way of parenting. And another is trust, also called social capital. And I was like, okay. And I finished the paragraph. And then I went back and I reread the paragraph. And then I reread the paragraph again because I was like, but what is the, like, what is it? What's the answer? One answer is found in the 6 areas described in my other book. And I'm still not going to tell you what it is. And then we can talk about another one. What?
I know. I was thinking girlfriend's like queen of the upsell here, right? Where she was like, you want to know the first 6 things? Go buy my other book, right? Because I was like, what just happened here? Right?
Yeah.
So I had a very similar thought. I mean, I liked the information that we did get.
Mhm.
But yeah, I will apologize. I don't know. Waffles is grumbling a little bit. We've shared in our main episode that I am in the process of moving. We are purging our entire lives and moving out of the country and embarking on world schooling. And my whole house is just discombobulated. My kids are feeling it. I'm feeling it. Even the dog is feeling it. So if when we edit the episodes, there's a little thing that says like remove background noise, and I'm never quite sure if we're going to fully get rid of Waffles grumbles or not. But today she's pretty grumbly. I'm not sure we're getting rid of the grumbles. So if you're listening, it's Waffles. You know, she's having a rough day. Okay.
That's all right. We all have rough days sometimes. And the book
Exactly.
supports it, right? Come on.
Exactly.
So I have the next comment, and it's just on the next page. So on page 62, the quote says, "A high level of trust has great value for a nation, socially, politically, and economically. It creates a public culture characterized by reciprocity and cooperation, and commitment to common laws and agreements." And I have to say, like, I just flagged that, right? Because for me, it really hit home. Probably even more so because I am pretty politically involved. If you follow my social media, you will see that. And I was reading this chapter specifically on the day of the vice presidential debates. And I was like, holy smokes, like it just seemed so true. And it feels like it's also in very short supply in the US these days. This idea of social trust and social capital on the larger scale.
Yeah, we're struggling, right? If you're listening from any other part of the world, I'm sure you're I think most of the world is looking at the United States right now and is like, what happened over there, right? So we know, we're aware, we feel it. Yeah. We're not
Yeah,
oblivious.
at least half of us are aware of the fact. The other half believe someone else who keeps telling them that everyone thinks, yeah.
Yeah,
Anyway.
very
So next
true.
page, 63.
My comment on 63 is closer down to the bottom. So do you want to kick yours off?
Okay.
It probably lands above mine geographically on the page.
Sure. Yeah. So she just kind of launches into this talk about idyllic rural areas when she was growing up and, growing up with people not locking their doors. And she's kind of going through this and talking about it. And, and in some ways, she's talking about it in the past. And in some ways, she's talking about it in the present and how it doesn't exist. It seems like there's kind of a bit of a counterpoint about it not existing in the United States and other places. And I'm going to argue that that's not exactly true. I grew up in one of these kinds of places, right? Like we didn't lock our doors. Cars were usually left unlocked, like lots of those kinds of things. And a lot of that still happens in more rural areas, right? I think, you know, fundamentally in cities, people tend to lock their stuff more. And in more rural areas, there's more trust in your neighbors and that kind of stuff. So it definitely does still exist in parts of the US and I'm sure many other countries. That said, I'm not really sold on the idea that it's as idyllic a picture as she paints. That was not my experience living there and also in hindsight. So,
Yeah. Yeah, I can see that. Yeah. Okay. I'm with you. Okay. I have a funny thing, right? So
yeah.
on the bottom of 63, she talks about the fact, and this is pretty well known, that people in Nordic countries bundle their kids up and let them nap outside, right? And ironically, I was raised that way too. We're not Nordic. Apparently it's an Irish thing too, especially if I wasn't feeling well. My grandmother always used to be like, we lived right on the water in New York. And so we had the salt air, and that's a big thing, right? That the salt air is healing and it helps with congestion. It's like a whole part of that whole, like, old school culture thing, right? And so my grandmother would be like, bundle her up. She would literally wrap me in like 42 blankets and a snowsuit and shove me outside for a nap. And I would nap out there for hours, and the salt air was supposed to be magical and all this kind of stuff, right? So I'm very well aware of the fact that in Nordic countries, this is super common. She talks about the fact that it's very common for the Danes to like just park their strollers outside and let their kids nap kidnap while they're in a cafe or a restaurant or whatever. But there's this one line in here that I just found hilarious because it says, trying to steal a pram, which is carrot, if you're not familiar, like a stroller or a carriage, right? Trying to steal a pram off the street has only been tried a few times here, but fortunately without much success. And I just translated that in my head to like they only took a couple of kids. Like it really wasn't a big deal. You know? And I just thought like that is so different from the American mindset, right? Because we would never, right? I feel like, you know, here it's like, but remember this kid? I mean, how many, I mean, we know the names, right? Adam Walsh and like all these names and they've been like burned into our minds as like fear, you know? And so I feel like it would take one baby stroller being taken off the street. It would be a huge thing and it would never happen again in the United States because nobody would allow it, I feel like. But she was just like, they only tried to take a couple of kids. It really wasn't a big deal. Like, you know, it was all good, you know? And so when I read that, I just kind of laughed out loud a little bit, you know, where I was like, oh, I feel like there's a difference in mindset displaying here. We talked about it last week, how like her Danish mindset kind of shines through in certain points. And I felt like that was one of them, you know?
Yeah.
So
Well, I think that's interesting, right? Because I agree and I disagree because, you know, like you're right. We are definitely taught to fear kidnapping and right. And we know that there's less of it now than there was when we were kids, and yet we think it's worse. Like the numbers, the stats, and all of that, like it all supports that like it's actually safer now than it was when we were kids, but no one actually feels that way.
right.
And so we definitely have this like a more fear mongering mentality around that. But then the flip side is like we still take kids to parks and we still take them to malls, right? And like how many times did kids get snatched from parks and malls? Like, so it didn't actually stop us from doing it, yet we're like much more fear mongering about it. So I don't know, that's interesting. But yeah, I mean, she does
Yeah.
definitely kind of put it out there in a little bit more flippant way. Like,
Yeah, exactly.
I can't imagine American being like, of course you're going to take your kid to the park only if you have been kidnapped from
Yeah,
them.
exactly. Right.
You're like,
There was a line, oh my gosh. I mean, I haven't seen her in years, but that comedian Kathy Griffin, the one who's got the red
Mhm.
hair and whatever, right?
Mhm.
She had that show years ago, My Life on the D List. And so I guess she was raised Catholic and she was having a conversation with her mom one day. And she was saying something about like the sex scandal in the Catholic Church and whatever. And her mom goes, Kathy, some of those priests barely touched those boys. Like it was like, and that's totally what I heard in my head when I read that thing where I was just like, oh my God. Right. You know, so
Yeah.
I was like, okay, then. So that's what I heard. Um, then on 64, she's got a section here. She's just got this one line that stood out to me that says, for me, trust is to let go of fear. And she does talk about some of the things in this section that's like letting go of fear. But I feel like there's a lot more to letting go of fear, probably just because for us, it's been like so culturally ingrained in us, right? I mean, I still tease my mom to this day. My parents live with us. I'm 43 years old. I was like petrified of escalators. You know that scene in Elf when Buddy's trying to get on the escalator and he's doing like the
Yeah.
big split? Because my mother painted these pictures of like people having their limbs ripped off and like gore from escalators and all this kind of stuff, you know? And I was like, you know, I mean, it was always about like kidnappings and death and, you know, like all this kind of stuff. And so I'm like, I feel like I need a little bit more of a roadmap of how to let go of fear. And I'm a pretty free range parent, but still, like I have some fears, right? I'm not afraid of escalators anymore, though. I do pretty good on an escalator now, but got over that one. But I feel like I need a little bit more detail than what she's given in the book. So I'm looking for clues as I'm reading, kind of looking for
Mhm.
clues on letting that go. Um, then she has a thing on 65 that I loved where she says, when I interact with other people, I go into it with full confidence in them. Since I want to be enriched by the energy and competencies of others and to give of everything I have, unconditional trust is an absolutely crucial prerequisite for me. I do not know how human relations can be done differently. So I cracked up, right? So my kids were born all in South Florida in Miami. It's not known for being the friendliest of places. Um, it's a pretty entitled area. It's rough, right? I love it. It was my home. It still feels like home to me. I have amazing friends there, but you had to sift through a whole lot to find genuine friendships there. Like it's not the easiest of areas, right? So I will never forget when my husband got transferred out of there, we moved to North Carolina. We flew up there, we went to Whole Foods, and then we were supposed to meet up with a realtor for house hunting, right? And we brought one kid with us. My oldest tends to be a little anxious when there's change. And so sometimes we'll take him for like a house hunting venture just to like minimize the fear of the unknown, right? So he and I are in Whole Foods, and he just quietly says to me, I mean, he wasn't 4, he wasn't shouting, right? He was 11 years old or something, right? He's like, I have to go to the bathroom. And I was like, oh, okay, no problem. We'll find it, right? There's this other guy in the aisle who's shopping in the aisle, right? I look, he doesn't have an apron, no name tag, whatever. He's holding a basket. This guy is clearly a shopper. He's
Mhm.
like, are you looking for the bathroom? And I'm like, mm-hmm. And he's like, he starts to tell me, and then he goes, "Ah, it's kind of complicated. I'll just show you. So it was like an older Whole Foods. So we had to go like around and then down this like hallway. We're walking down this hallway. I'm like, this dude's taking us out the back loading dock door. We're going to end up in a dumpster. Like, that's all there is to it. Right. Come to find out, he was just a nice person. We had lived in South Florida for so long that I was so skeptical that someone would do that, that I was like, clearly this is one of those like human trafficking situations that's on Dateline. Like,
Yeah.
this has got to be it, right? And so it's interesting because I think it just depends on where you live. Like,
Mhm.
there's, when we lived there was like a bit of armor that you would put up because it was a pretty intense environment to live in, right? Where, people weren't very genuine. People didn't always have your best interest at heart. A lot of times they were looking out for numero uno. And so I was like, we've kind of worked through that over the years as we've lived in places where people are a little bit nicer, and we're like, oh, okay, it's okay then, right?
Mhm.
um, Go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, no, I was just going to say, I do think it's interesting because she talks about that, but then later on, I made a note somewhere. We'll get to it eventually. I find, and I would say most people would find, that Europeans are generally more reserved than Americans. Americans of all of the groups out there tend to be a little bit more outgoing and open book than most people would prefer we were. So to me, I find it interesting that you've got this kind of like dichotomy of like, on the one hand, I open every conversation like trusting that they're going to like, but I don't actually open myself up to people. Like,
Right.
okay, you know,
Yeah.
sure.
Yeah. The mindset is so different, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Then she has a thing in here, a little bit further down on that page on 65, where she talks about trust being an important part of their educational school system, where students learn early on that better results are achieved by working in teams and cooperating on tasks. They focus a lot on trust and empathy. And it says you learn that life is a safe place and that people generally want the best for you. And I feel like, I don't know. I mean, just I did not grow up that way, right? I grew up like there are kidnappers lurking in between, the clothing carousels at J.C. Penney who are just like waiting for you, right? Like, and so
Mhm.
I just think like culturally, it's so different, right? And I kind of feel like, how do you begin to then deprogram all of that stuff, right? I'm envisioning going to the playground with other moms when my kids were smaller, right? And it was like, there'd be, kids climbing, and it was like, be careful, be careful, be careful, like all of that. And just all of it, it kind of pervades how we interact with our kids in so many ways, I feel like.
Hmm. I will say I have a tag. You can't exactly see it. I use color coded tags, and I had that exact same section tagged with an OD green color because that's how I felt about it. Um, but I didn't actually make it in my notes because I had a lot of notes in the first chapter, and I was like, "Oh, we'll never get through book club if I actually put all of my notes." But for me, I was like, I felt like this whole section was kind of one of those like. Mm, embracing the mainstream and not being realistic about anything outside of the bell curve, right? I can't believe that in Denmark, all kids are taught that better results are achieved working in teams and cooperating on tasks, and that you don't have gifted and talented kids or twice exceptional kids or kids with learning disabilities or whatever the case may be, even just kids who are socially awkward that aren't getting screwed in group projects. Um, So yeah, I was like, I don't think that's that different country to country.
Not sure I'm buying it, right? Yeah, could
Yeah.
be. I mean, we do have a mom in our group who she's based in Denmark. And I've known her for years. I had her child in one of my classes that I taught years and years and years ago. She is, oh my gosh, she's probably 17 now. I mean, it's like, oh my gosh. And she's amazing. But she's homeschooling. It's not super common in Denmark. Her kiddo is neurodivergent, is on the spectrum, and um it would be interesting to get like a real life, we should do like a 20 questions fact check with her at some point, when we're
Yeah.
done with this book, and be like,
After we've done the whole book, like do an actual like, all right, so what did you think? What do you like?
yeah, and she'll give us, the skinny on whether or not some of these things are as idyllic as they're portrayed in the book.
Mhm. Yeah.
So we
Yeah.
both have a ton of notes on 66 and 67. What did you take away there?
Yeah, so it was that thing. Like pretty much I liked everything that she wrote in these 2 pages, right? Like I thought these were probably some of the best pages in the 2 chapters that we read. So I just pulled out some of my favorite quotes. Let's see. The first one is the quote, "The thing is that trust isn't something that comes out of the blue. It is something that must be practiced, and even better, from the early years of parenthood." And so she's specifically talking about trust with your kids and the fact that you have to have it. And you don't just say, like, okay, now we're going to have trust, right? You have to build on it. You have to develop it. You have to practice it. And I was like, that's so true. I think we forget that. And a lot of this chapter, right, is about how to have trust with your teens. And so, like, the next quote that I really like says, "Sure, there will be plenty of episodes where you can't live up to such a high standard, which is human and okay. The same goes for your children. But you move on and make sure to articulate what happened and take ownership of not living up to your best intentions. That fosters trust." And I mean, we talk about that all the time in our own
Yeah.
home, right? Like, hey, just I, it is not a weakness to, as a parent, go to your child and say, you know what? I
That
was
was not
not,
my finest moment. Yeah.
yeah, I was not my best self then. I am really sorry about that. Like I should not have said that, or I should not have acted that way. And, I'm sorry. And I'm going to commit to trying to catch myself the next time and do better. Um, and so many people are so hesitant to do that.
Yeah, I totally agree. I can totally see that. Mhm.
Yeah, and then the last quote that I had from these pages that I especially liked was, "Trust until adolescence has been carried by reciprocity. It now becomes a more one-way demand from you to them. Your understanding and forbearance suddenly disappear and are replaced by a greater degree of distrust, looking for instances of your teens not taking responsibility well enough, a distrust that you assume in advance that has the opposite effect from what you want." And I was like,
Oof.
oh, buddy, right? Like, A, how true. B, I could give you a dozen examples off the top of my head where this has happened, right? Like, a kid has made a mistake, and instead of giving them the grace uh, that you would want, right? Like immediately, like now this lays the groundwork for the fact that I cannot trust my teen. They didn't
Right.
just make a mistake, they're untrustworthy. And like how that snowballs into just this like terrible relationship that no one actually wants to be in, right?
Mhm.
Hmm.
Yeah, it's completely true. I mean, I gave an example at our main topic episode this week where we were talking about Common Core kind of in our weekly recap that we're leaving the country in 3 weeks and I can't find my passport, right? And so here's the deal, right? I can't find my passport. There's a solution. It's not going to be a cheap solution. It's going to be a headache. I'm going to have to get up early and go do the thing, right? But I'm a grown freaking woman and I can't find my passport. It's in this house somewhere and I can't find it. And I can't rely on the fact that it's just going to magically turn up by the time I have to travel. So I'm going to need to go get another one, right? But it's like, what are most parents' responses when their kids lose something that's super important or super expensive to replace or a super logistical nightmare to replace, right? And most of the time it's like, oh, what a giant screw up, or I can't believe you lost this or whatever, right? And it's like, but we do that stuff, right? Like, I mean, we totally do that. It's just human, right? We're all juggling a ton of stuff. I mean, my kids have left the country with their passports by themselves to go to like events or, activities, homeschool activities for a month and maintained their passport by themselves. I lost mine in my own freaking house, right? So it's like sometimes we just have to acknowledge like we're so quick to jump on them sometimes, but it's
Mhm.
like, we're not perfect either. We totally screw stuff up. And so, having that there instead of then having that be like, now I'm never going to trust you with an important piece of paper ever again. Somebody could say that to me right now, it might be worthwhile. If anybody wants to volunteer to manage my life, applications are being accepted. Right?
I'm pretty sure your husband probably thought that. He might have been smart enough to not say it, but
Oh no, he did say something today. He was like, that's going to cost a fort. I was like, don't even start with me, pal. And I rattled off like the 700 things that I am juggling right now for this move because he's
Mhm.
already moved ahead of us. So I'm on my own doing all this stuff. And so I'm like, don't even freaking start with me, pal. He regretted that by the end of that conversation. He will not be bringing up the lost passport again. It did not go well for him.
Also, right? Also, that is an example of like sometimes we say it and we shouldn't have. And it's okay.
Yeah.
No one is expecting perfection. And the book talks about that. Like, perfection is a ridiculous goal. Being willing to have the conversation and circle back and be like, yeah, not my finest moment. I'm
Yeah.
sorry. I'm going to remember that, like that's where the learning happens. Right?
Yeah. I totally agree. So I had a couple of thoughts from those same 2 pages. I really liked this
Mhm.
section. It wasn't my most profound section. We'll get there. I loved one page in here, but I did like this part. So I just kind of like snippets on 67 where she talks about like, it's about dialogue and engagement, right? Like they
Mhm.
need that so much as teenagers, right? We can't be just talking to them. It has to be a dialogue. They have to be engaged. There's another thing that's in here a little bit later where she talks about kind of how like harping on them. And I'm like, they have completely turned you. They are
Mhm.
mute button central if you are doing that, right? They
Mhm.
have to be engaged in that conversation. There's a thing in here about reframing your language to avoid ultimatums, which I am all about. So I loved that section. And then she has a thing here that says your teen needs, hold on. Your teen needs you to trust in them. And that is the key essence. You must remind yourself daily if you feel the temptation to freak out, it is worth it. But like, it can't just be like faked trust. Like, they
Mhm.
genuinely have to, kids are not stupid, right? They genuinely have to know that you have their back. And so I really liked kind of those sections that were in there. Um, so yeah. And then that next section that I just kind of referenced was on page 70, where she talks about the implicit assumption of mistrust when you don't talk with but only at your teen, and that's the part where I said like if you're just kind of like rattling stuff off at them endlessly without stopping, without engaging, without involving them in the discussion, they are so tuning you out, right? And it's like you're just sitting there having a monologue to an audience that has no interest in listening. So I liked that as
Yeah.
a reminder.
Yeah, no, for sure. I mean, in fairness, I marked pages 66 to 71 um to have my husband read. Like,
Ooh,
here, I'm
yeah.
not going to ask you to read the whole book because that's never going to happen, but you can read this section. I'm certain of it, and it would be
Yeah.
helpful, like good parenting advice in general.
Mm-hmm. So true. I like it.
Oh no, a tab just came off in my hand. Now I don't even know what I was talking about.
Oh my
Okay.
goodness.
I know the horror. Um, all
Book
right,
club
so
crisis.
um, on page 71, we both have comments. I'll just say that for me, again, we're kind of like circling back to this idea of trust, and she talks a lot about that in this chapter. The quote that for me, I was like, says, the moment you begin to trust less that your teen is trustworthy, then a vicious cycle of unfulfilled agreements and frequent quarrels can start, which in turn will weaken the trust between you more and lead to further breaches of trust. Just like what I was kind of saying before, right? And this idea comes up over and over. This was just a particularly good quote about it, right? That cycle that you can easily get into. And it happens, right? It happens in regular interpersonal relationships. I just
Yeah.
don't think that a lot of people notice it with their teen, right? Like, um, and noticing it is the first step to changing it.
Yeah, for sure. Can't be working on something you don't even acknowledge exists just yet, right? Or that you're
Yeah.
aware happens. So I like it. All right, 72 was my favorite page in this whole section of reading. And the reason it was my favorite page is because sometimes I have these thoughts. Did you hate 72? Is that why? Do you have some
Yeah.
margin note that you're like, this is total bullshit?
I have multiple tabs and they range from light pink to dark pink, which is all my way of saying WTF, WTF, WTF.
Okay, loved it. So I don't have a color coding system, but this is my favorite. Okay.
Okay.
So the reason that I loved this is sometimes I have a philosophy or a way of doing something and I struggle to explain it. And I'm trying to explain it and I get frustrated with myself feeling like I'm not doing a good job of this. This is not clear, right? And so the best example that I've been able to come up with so far is I've talked about the fact, not necessarily even on the podcast, but just in life in general when I'm talking to other parents, like my experience has been that the more freedom children have, true freedom, right? That they rise to keep that freedom and not in a carrot and stick, ultimatum, punishment, threatening, looming sort of way, right? It doesn't even have to be spoken. They enjoy the freedom and they elevate themselves to meet that level of freedom. And the best I've ever been able to come up with is that Peter Parker quote that's like, unto whom much is given, much is expected, or something like that, right? But that's not even a good one. I've never been pleased with the way that kind of expressed the situation because the expectation is not coming from me, right? They're just doing it, right? And so on 72, oh my gosh, not there's a scientific philosophy that explains what I've been trying in a really crappy way to explain for years. And I was so excited. Okay, so it says, she starts off with this anecdote that says, a colleague once asked how, when I was a teacher, I always managed to get the big boys in the graduating class to take out the trash from the class after school. I replied that I always told them that I knew they would do it. They knew I was counting on them, whereas with the other teachers, they were met with distrust that they would remember to do it. Therefore, they lived up to the fact that there was no expectation that they would do it, so why make an effort? Okay, so then she says there's a psychological phenomenon that describes how expectations can modify behavior. It's called the Pygmalion effect, which I've heard that term before, but I never knew that it related to this idea, right? I never fully got it until I read this. So it says it's called the Pygmalion effect, and it provides evidence for self-fulfilling prophecy, which is based on the idea that others' beliefs about you become true because their belief impacts how you behave. And then she explains that philosophy a little bit more in a call out box that says, Robert Rosenthal is a German born American psychologist and professor. He is best known for the Pygmalion effect, also known as the Rosenthal effect, which refers to the psychological phenomenon that the greater the beliefs and expectations on individuals, often children and students, the better they function. The Pygmalion effect is a self amplifying in both negative and positive directions. And I was like, oh my God, now I have a way to describe it that actually makes sense to other people. And it isn't just me like spouting shit off. It's an actual psychological thing. I was so excited because that has been my experience with my kids literally for like basically their whole lives, right? That when they have that freedom and they have that I do not have to harp a ton. They're not perfect. I mean, every once in a while, I still have to ask for something to be taken out twice or something like that, like the trash to be taken out or whatever, right? But generally speaking, it's been working and I never had a way to describe it. And so I was like, this just made my whole week. So that's it. I'm just going to sit here happy over that.
So I will give you that I find that idea accurate, right? I mean, like that theory, that philosophy, like sure, if people generally believe in you, then you achieve more. And if people don't believe in you, it is much harder to achieve, right? Like there is I definitely believe in this kind of like a self-fulfilling element to this. for me, her example of like, I tell them that I know you'll do it, and so they do it. I'm like, how about some freaking hefty emotional manipulation? Like, to me, it just seems so manipulative to be like, well, I know that you're going to take care of this because I trust that you're going to take care of this. Like, how about passive aggressive emotional manipulation to like the 10th degree for me? Like, I did
Right.
not like that example at
And
all.
I'm wondering like how much of that conversation actually happens though. Like we're not having conversations like that for the most part where, I have to say like, and remember, like they just,
Yeah.
there's this level of trust and autonomy and freedom, and they just have risen to that level of like, I've got this. Right. And it
Yeah.
has worked like, and it's very, and I think that's part of the reason I've had such a hard time describing it is because it just happens, right? Like there's
Mhm.
not like a lot of conversation around it. There's not a lot of any of that. It's just like they just know that they are empowered, and so they behave in a way that is elevated in that sense, and it has completely worked. And so I had no idea kind of how that happened, and I don't even know necessarily that it was like a planned thing for say. I mean, I have 3 kids that were under 4 at a certain period in time, right? So they've always been trusted with certain things earlier probably than other kids might have been, because there was one of me and 3 of them under 4 years old, like, and so it was like they liked having that, like the confidence that they had, and the freedom that they had, and all of that kind of stuff. And so it just kind of blossomed and grew from a super young age.
Yeah.
So I thought it was awesome. I loved it.
I think for me, it comes down to the fact that as with all psychological things, it can be done in a positive way and it can be done or implemented in a less
Yeah,
positive
I
way.
could totally see that.
And so, I mean, I think if you're going to read this and be like, oh, that's great, like be aware of how you're using it. Like, don't turn it into this like emotional manipulation, right? Because I can easily see it becoming that. And I
Mm.
have seen it, right? Like I have seen it. I know people that operate that way. And like it's a gross way.
Yeah, that's
It's
sad.
gross. Like you don't want that. Um, but the idea that, like you it's not even like the weight of expectations, but it's just a knowledge that like you can achieve this, that idea of like you can achieve whatever you want to achieve and I'm here to support you. And the fact that that in itself becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy, as opposed to, the parents who are like, well, I mean, you're never going to get out of this life, you're never going to be more than this life. Like, I mean, it's pretty easy to live that out if that's what someone is always telling you. So yeah.
And that's on the flip side. Like people, I know there are really horrendous people who would verbalize what you just said, like you're never going to
Mhm.
become anything, whatever. But there are, on the flip side of me saying like these are not conversations that we're directly having, right? And it's just kind of like this culture that exists. You could see
Mhm.
that on the flip side too, where the culture
Yeah.
could exist. That's like you're not necessarily saying like you're a loser, you're never going to amount to anything, but the energy is there, right? They
Mhm.
know that that's kids are so intuitive, right? And they get that sense pretty quickly. So it could work both ways, definitely in that way too.
Mhm. No, yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
So I found the next page, um, it's got a lot of purple stickers, which means conflicted for anyone who's following along with my color coding.
I'm learning a lot about this system today that I did not know. I like it.
And I think my book is just full of all different colors, and it's how I keep track of how I feel for when I go back to type up my notes.
I
This is
like
where you
it.
can see like I'm only reformed type A personality. It's still there. Um, so yeah, so she's talking about agreements between parents and teenagers. And in this specific section, she's getting into this idea that Danish teens drink and party at a fairly young age and that it's socially acceptable. And I found this passage interesting because in our private homeschool moms group that's on Facebook, the mom that you were talking about who's from Denmark, she mentioned this. She
Yeah.
was like, hey, let's be careful glorifying how we raise our teens because they have like huge drinking problems and like and all of this kind of stuff. And so like it was interesting, like in light of that. And the author is talking about how she's made an agreement with her teenager along the lines of like, okay, so I think she said her teen was 16. I'd have to double check. But this idea, like, okay, so the agreement is you can have 2 beers and you have to be home by 10 o'clock. And you try that out for a while. And if after a while that's going well, then you extend the amount of time that they can be out, or, you change these. And for me, I'm like, I'm just not sure about that. Like, that seems pretty like, okay, like only have this many beers while you're young and impressionable and you're certain to make bad choices and mistakes. Like, I don't know, like, I don't know. Like I'm struggling with this idea of like being all in on the like how like let's have a really good discussion about how many beers, not like a beer, but like let's talk about how many beers you're gonna have at 15 while you're out partying with your friends. Like I don't I'm okay. But she does go on to say, quote, as a bonus, you avoid your teenager needing to break all boundaries and challenge the roles that have been set in the negotiation because they have been made in a shared understanding. And so I do absolutely agree with that, right? Like it's an important natural part of teen development to push boundaries and break rules and things like that. So I'm like, oh, I struggle because it's natural for them to break some rules. So do you want to set a boundary out there that's like, okay, have this many beers that will actually make you drunk based on your body weight, knowing that they might break that and have like even more, and like what kind of terrible choices are they going to make at that point? I don't know. I was like, but at the same time, I do like, I truly believe that when you tell kids they absolutely cannot do something, and if it's
Right.
off limits, then like they're for sure going to go do it. Right. Like
Yeah.
I'm a reformed Christian, and I don't mean that in the way that sounds non secular. Like, I mean, I got away from it. But I absolutely had one of those ridiculous purity rings in high school where, and then like as soon as I got the purity ring, my boyfriend and I did the deed. Like, and we got the purity rings together, right? I mean, like these things, they don't work. Like they don't work. And so I'm realistic about that. I guess I'm more of the school of thought of like, look, I don't think you should do this. And these are the reasons why. And I hope whatever you do, you make informed choices and, here are the options and here are the things. And if you find yourself in a bad situation, you can always call me. And, I will not yell. There will not be, like I will always be there to help you out of whatever kind of tricky situation you get in. I just really hope you'll make good choices,
Right.
as opposed to like, okay, so we're going to let you go like this far with it. I'm struggling.
Yeah. It's tough, and then I think it would further complicate things if you have a family, and maybe this isn't the case in Denmark. Maybe it's not as common as it is here. I don't know. But if you have like a family history of substance abuse or something like that, it would like add extra layers of complexity into parenting in that realm. So I totally can see that.
Yeah.
That makes sense. So she ends this chapter, chapter 3. There's a quote at the very end that says, in order to function with an equal and meaningful trust between you and your teenagers, you must be able to listen, understand, and be prepared to meet their needs when it comes to chores and decisions that belong to everyday life. If there is no trust, there is no cooperation or anything else. And so I just thought that put a great point on like just how essential trust is, which I liked.
Yeah. Yeah, it was a nice little wrap up to it.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So before we dive into chapter 4, we just want to quickly remind people that we have a Patreon. You should absolutely come and join us. First off, you should join us because there's a free resource over there about hurricanes. And I promise we don't have the power to cause more hurricanes, but it was well timed. Um, because you are probably teaching your kid a lot about hurricanes this year, whether you live close to the coast or not. And you don't have to sign up or anything. I went and I did it myself to make sure that I wasn't lying to people about this. Like, you just click on the link through our Instagram. It's on our link tree in Instagram and a few other places. But literally, like, you just go in and you can find our page and it'll say log in and you can say ignore and you scroll all the way down to the bottom and there's this free resource on hurricanes. So definitely check that out. But you
You
can
could do
also
it from our website now too.
oh yeah, that's true. We do have a
Yes.
website. It's very snazzy. We just got
We're
it. We're very
fancy like
excited.
this now.
Yeah,
Yeah,
we
exactly.
are. But yeah, so come check us out on Patreon. There's a couple different levels. You get a monthly unit study with it. You can buy the unit studies separately if you want. But once you do Patreon for $12, you can get the unit study and you can get a monthly Q&A with us. And you can also do a virtual mom's night out where we are like working to just build more community, right? Like, you can actually talk with other people and find your people and develop these relationships and friendships. So definitely come check us out on Patreon.
Mhm.
And so with that, let's do chapter 4, right? So chapter 4 is called Play, Building Independence and Character. I was not sure where this was going, and it went better than I thought, though I didn't have a ton of notes, and you didn't really either this chapter, right? Like,
I didn't. I had some fairly um like heavy moments where when I would read some stuff, I was like, wow, like you realize the full weight of what our young people are experiencing based upon the way she wrote some of the things. So
mm,
I didn't have a ton of notes, but I did have a couple of moments where I was like, wow, I can completely see how that would be overwhelming. And it would be easy for me to write something off like that experience that she's describing as just being like, oh, you just go and do it. It'll be fine. It'll be great. Go. You'll have a great time, you know? And then
mhm,
she kind of goes into like the depth of what that means for them. And I
mm,
was like, oh, I might, need to step back a little bit and say, like, oh, that's a really big deal for them. This is really
mhm.
new for them. It's really a lot for them. And so I liked some of the stuff that was in this section.
Yeah, well, that's the thing. I thought it was a good section. I read it. I enjoyed reading it. I just didn't find that I took that many notes,
Yeah.
but it was a good chapter. So this whole chapter, we're looking at free play and what that looks like for teens. And yeah, it's one of those things. I can see how free play is still super important for teens and how it's also incredibly challenging, right? Because they aren't little kids anymore. They're not, playing with their play kitchen or pretending to make a meal or, you know, for the most part, they're not having entire backstories with their stuffed animals in our house. That's probably happening a little bit more, but that's
Ours
not the,
too.
like that's not the main thing. That's not their main free play as teenagers. But at the same time, they're not adults who can go out dancing and partying and clubbing and gambling as their like random free play, right? Like, they're not even allowed in those spaces. So I thought that this was an interesting look at what all of that looks like.
Hmm.
That said, on page 80, there's a section called duties, and she talks about making household chores and a routine so that teens can zone out while doing them and let their minds wander. And she goes on to talk about how, like, this wandering and unstructured thinking, it helps recharge us. It's a really good and important thing for our brains to do. And, she uses examples like, mindlessly vacuuming or chopping vegetables or putting away the dishes while listening to music or walking your dog, right? Like, these chores, standard things you have to do all the time, and how you kind of do them on autopilot. You zone out, your brain gets to do its own thing. And I agree that it's good for our mental health to have these times for this like free flowing thinking. But I think it's unfair to call it play,
Yeah.
right? Like, Sometimes I like just standing and like chopping a bunch of veggies, like every once in a while I'm in the mood to mindlessly do that and noodle things. And I'll be the first one to say, like, my best random thinking is done in the shower, right?
Me
Because
too.
like you have to shower and the routine. You don't have to spend a lot of time thinking about what you're doing in the shower. So you're thinking about all kinds of things, right? And I really like that free flow thinking, but don't insult me by calling that my free time to play. Like
Yeah.
for me, I'm like, my gut reaction was like, that's like the people who try to tell moms that they get to practice self-care by showering alone or going to the
Right.
grocery store, right? Like
Yeah.
if I'm handling tasks necessary to survival for both myself and others, that's not self-care, right?
Exactly.
Doing
Yeah.
home maintenance and chores is not free play. Like I appreciate the random time to zone out and think about things, but that's not play.
No, it's not, right? I had the same thought. I mean, we have, so I kind of made a note. We have what we call cleaning parties in my house. And a cleaning party is code for the house has spiraled to a point that it's so holy crap, right? Like there's stuff everywhere. There's stuff on the counter. There's packages that need to be put away. The recycling's overflowing, right? And so I will schedule a cleaning party. Like I'll send out a message to the kids. We have like a kid chat. There's a whole family chat. My parents live with us. I don't invite them to the cleaning parties. They're not required to, they're not required to participate in those. But like I'll send out to the kids and I'll be like, cleaning party at 9 o'clock. And they all know what it means, right? It means the house has gotten out of control and we all just need to chip in. If we all chip in 20 minutes, it'll be done, right? And
Mhm.
then it'll be back to normal. That's not play. Nobody enjoys it. The fact that it's called a party is kind of a misnomer, right? Like
Yeah.
it's just kind of what it's been called over the years, you know? So yeah,
Mhm.
I totally agree. I do love the fact that on 81, she talks about the fact that the kids live in the house, function in the house, have responsibilities in the house. And she says, we depend on each other and each other's contributions to the family. And she talks about the fact that her kids do not get chore money for the things that they're doing. She says, my kids have been given pocket money, but not because they help at home. This is not something for which they should be paid. It is part of being in a family and therefore something to naturally commit to. And that's the way we have functioned, right? Like the day I get paid for chores, my kids will get paid for chores, right? We all live here. We all
Mhm.
made a mess. Everyone has dishes in the sink. We're all going to do this together. There's no reason you're going to get paid and I have to pay you for it when you already ate the food that I already paid for, right? Like that's just not how that economy works, right? Like we all made a mess. We're all going to clean up the mess. And so I like the fact that she separated those two things, but that she's still giving them money because she feels like it helps them, you know, learn fiscal responsibility and understand a little bit of budgeting on a small scale and kind of learning those lessons. It gives them a bit of independence and things like that. But I just love that the two weren't connected in her model.
Yeah. I'm not sure if we've talked about that on the podcast before or not, but I'm a big proponent of that. I do absolutely agree with allowance or that kind of thing for teaching this idea of budgeting and saving your money and and learning how to have money and work with money and all of that. But I also very much agree that it should not be tied to chores. Like you have to take care of your home, you have to maintain your home, you have to do that your whole life. And if you always got paid for it as a kid, no one is going to pay you when you move out of your home. And so,
Yeah,
like,
I'm waiting for my allowance. Like I do a lot here and it hasn't happened, you know.
no, I mean, in our house, the adults still get an allowance. That's what we call it. We call it our monthly allowance, and the paycheck goes into the joint account to pay for all of the things. And then we each get an amount that's separated, that's transferred into our own personal spending accounts that we use for going out and, random things. And it's not tied to whether or not we did our job taking out the
Right.
recycling or did the laundry, right? It's our spending money. It's our pocket money.
Right. Exactly. Same concept.
Yep.
So I liked
Yep.
that. I liked that she called that out and kind of explained how the happiest people in the world do it too. And I was like, oh, good. I'm on track there.
Yep, for sure. Okay, so the next comment I had was on page 87. I kind of mentioned this before, but she's talking about um, social media posts and how every social media post and shares not only with your friends, but also with companies who buy and sell your information and target you with ads, etc. And for me, like, yes, there's truth to that, right? And we're all very aware of the algorithms and all of that is happening. But just the way that she's talking about it, it really made me think about our time of living in Europe. We lived there for multiple years, and our European friends and all of our friends outside of North America, really, and how in Europe they have much stronger restrictions around what social media can do and how they can sell your information. And also, there's generally less social media usage compared to the average American, and definitely like a higher level of distrust and, less of a desire to be an open book for Europeans. And that really came through in this section for me.
Yeah, I liked that section. And then she talks about gaming addiction on the next page, which
Mhm.
we've talked about before. I mean, even in our episode where we talked about game schooling, we talked about gaming addiction, right? We're not
Mhm.
foolish enough to know that it's not a real thing, or that it doesn't impact people. But I like, she has a description on page 90 where she just kind of talks about the way it takes over the dopamine system and the way it kind of rewires a bit of how
Mhm.
you sense excitement. And I hate to use the word pleasure because I feel like we're going to get we're okay. Amanda and I are constantly getting shadow banned on TikTok, like over the stupidest stuff, right? So I
Yeah.
feel like here I am. I'm like, how it rewires your brain about how you feel pleasure, and I'm like, oh, there goes another one. We'll be in TikTok jail all over again, right? But I thought,
Banana.
I know, right? Exactly. Just
Ban over banana. Pleasure and banana in the same sentence will never fly.
throwing eggplants in there and a peach, and we're done. We're done for. We're going to be off TikTok forever. I'm like, all the crap that's on social media. How are we always in trouble?
Things that we're in trouble for. Like, oh man.
It's so stupid, I'm like, oh, but so it wasn't anything revolutionary, but I sometimes it's just the way somebody words something or whatever that I'm like, oh, I appreciate the way you wrote that. Thank you. Food for thought. So I liked that on 90.
Yeah, the same for me. In 90, she talks about addictions to screens, and then she differentiates between screen time addiction and gaming addiction, and really, like you said, goes into what gaming addiction does and like the actual physical effects of it and how that plays out. And I'll be honest, because we're pretty low on screen time in general, I hadn't thought of that distinction between the two, probably because I haven't had to research any of it, and so like it was interesting. I was a good read. I liked it.
Mm-hmm.
Just on the very next page, she had a quote that I was like, oh, again, another one of those, like, I just like the way of putting it. So she says, quote, "They," meaning teens, "need to feel that they matter. And they can only do that if they are around their family, friends, and community, getting wiser about who they are." And I just, yeah, I thought that was, again, one of those things. Like sometimes it doesn't have to be new to be profound. And for me, I was like, yeah, I think that's, for me, that's kind of like the nut of the screen time, and that, like, how do you make sure that they're around their family, their friends, and their community, and that they're developing those connections that are so important as a growing teen and then, further into life.
Mm-hmm.
Good. All right. And so then a little, not quite so deep. The next section is titled Courage, right? We're going to talk about courage. And for me, we both have notes here. I'll start with kind of my quote. So she says, quote, "Courage is also when your teenager stands up and argues for their views or values. You regard them as being nosy and disrespectful. No, they're brave, because trying and testing everything they absorb from their friends and surroundings will only make them wiser about themselves. It is healthy, and although it may irritate you, you must learn to understand what is going on with them." And like, I think it's one of those, like, it's a constant struggle for parents these days of finding that line between, like, argue your point back. Please don't roll your eyes at me. Like, finding that balance. It's hard, but it's important. It's really important to remember that, like, it's a huge, them arguing with you and standing up to you, whether it's, not so kind because they've lost their temper and they're feeling a little overwhelmed and there's a lot of stuff going on, or it's a much more respectful form of negotiating and trying to show you that they think you're being unreasonable or unfair about a certain expectation, right? Those are all important parts of development.
Mhm. Yeah, and then I have the last note for this section of reading, which was on page 93, and, I have introverted kids for the most part, and I think going through the pandemic and hunkering with them really showed just how happy we were, introverted in our introverted bubbles, right? Um, but there's a thing here on page 93, and again, whether or not you wanna classify this as free play, like we talked about earlier, as far as cleaning the house and chopping vegetables, I'm not sure if this truly, in my definition, constitutes as free play. But whether you want to call it that or not, um, there's a thing here on page 93 that says, think about what courage it takes when teenagers enter new social relationships. There is a lot to be won or lost, and they may risk losing face and being rejected. Yet it happens all the time. And so I think about the fact, like, I was super shy when I was in school. I know I felt, looking back, insecure. I'm assuming most of my classmates probably also felt insecure no matter what they were projecting, right? But as a 43-year-old woman, I've kind of come to this place of like, I don't give a shit. I show up as who I am. It is what it is. Take me, leave me. I don't freaking care, right? But it's like I feel like, first of all, not every adult has that, right? There are still
Mhm.
adults trying to figure out who they are and how they kind of engage and interact with the world. I feel fairly confident. And part of that's probably life experience and stuff like that too. Like, we're all shaped by our experiences. I think the heavier things that you deal with, sometimes the more you don't so cliche, but like, you don't sweat the small stuff because you've dealt with like really big freaking stuff. Like,
Mhm.
I don't know if I've mentioned it, like my husband's a cancer survivor. It was like a brutal situation, right? And so, like, now I'm just kind of like, nothing else matters, right? Like, no matter what you
Mhm.
throw at me, I can always be like, no one's dying, we're good. Like, it's I can do that. But it's like the kids don't have that. And so I have one who's a super duper homebody, and I'm very keen to just kind of toss him out there because he's not going to do it himself, right? And so I'll be like, go, you're going to have a great time, just go, it'll be great, right? And I think I liked the fact here, I will still do that, don't get me wrong, but I feel like this was a huge thing as far as like acknowledging how hard that is, right?
Mhm.
And how stressful it is that they don't have the life experience that we have. They don't have the confidence that some adults have, or whatever degree of confidence you have as an adult. It's probably more than a teenager, right? Because you've got more life experience to pull from.
Mhm.
And just kind of acknowledging that, like, that's hard for them, and we kind of need to give them like a little bit of credit there. And so we are, when we leave here, when our house sells in a couple of weeks, we're going to a world schooling hub in Poland. And they put out lists at a lot of these hubs, like, all the ages and stuff, and there's about a dozen teens that are going, and I'm super excited for my kids to be able to go and make friends and all that kind of stuff. But yeah, like, reading this, I'm like, oh, like that first night when we have like the initial like meet and greet at the hub meeting, like, knowing like they're going to walk in with a very different, like, I'm just going to walk in and be like, hi peeps. And that's not probably going to be their experience. And so I liked the fact that that was there to just kind of be like, this is hard for them, right?
Mhm.
And that maybe it requires a little bit more discussion beforehand or discussion afterwards, right? And testing the waters and seeing how they're feeling, and seeing if they have any questions or whatever the case might be. Like, so I liked that part. It was a good reminder.
Well, yeah, and I think it's that, you said it, the life experience, right? Even as adults and women in our 40s, I'm sure that at some time in recent memory, we have had a friendship fizzle out, or we've grown beyond a friendship for one reason or another. And those hurt, right? And you wonder if something could have been done differently, and you wonder if you want to try to get it back, or if you're happy leaving it where it is. And we still think through all of those things, right? And that happens so much more with kids because they are growing and they're being influenced by so many things, and their parents have so much control. Not necessarily saying, like you can be friends with that person and you can't, but I'm not going to drive you to that thing anymore, or we've
Right.
moved and so now you're in a different school. And so the friendship fizzles out for reasons beyond your control. And like learning how to deal with that and handle that. And we kind of expect them to just be like, don't worry, you'll have a lot of different friends. Like I had a different friend in elementary school and a different best friend in middle school and a different best friend in high school because they were all with different kids, and like it'll be fine. And we can say that because we lived through it and we know that it'll be
Yeah.
fine, but in it, it's got to be really hard because even when we're in it as adults, it's hard. So yeah, that like it's not always easy to take a step back and remember, like, oh, it did not feel that easy, right?
Yeah.
It did not. And that's important to acknowledge and talk about.
Yeah, like the confidence level that I have today is not the confidence level I had 30 years ago, right?
Yeah.
And that's the way they're moving through the world potentially. It's hard to say because
Mhm.
I don't fully remember that experience. I can't fully embody their experience, but probably similar, right? And so I was like, "Oh, thanks for the reminder, lady." Like that was pretty helpful.
Yeah.
All right, so before we wrap up today, we would love to invite you to come and hang out with us on our Facebook group. I have an exciting announcement that I'm actually going to post in the Facebook group. I told Amanda, so I had to run some errands this morning. I had posted in the Facebook group a couple of weeks ago. I mean, we talk about homeschooling, we talk about life, whatever. So I had posted in the group like, I have no idea where to buy jeans, right? We're getting ready to go on this trip. It's going to be cold. I live in the South, so I need different types of clothing, right? I'm like, where does one even go to buy jeans? It's been so long. I mean, I
Mhm.
put my pajamas on in March of 2020 when the pandemic started, and I'm still wearing them. And so I was like, oh my gosh, I went to buy jeans today, fully expecting to be like in tears by the time it was done. People, second pair, total winner. Like, oh my gosh, I'm so excited. I'm going to go on the Gap's website when I'm done here and see if they make those jeans in another color because it was that good. So I'm like, oh my gosh. So sometimes we talk about stuff like that in the group. Sometimes we talk about homeschooling. It's a friendly environment. Come hang out with us, invite a homeschool mom friend. It's all good. But we would love to have you. So if you just search Homeschool Moms Unfiltered in Facebook, and then there's usually a filter for like pages and groups and stuff like that, go to groups and you'll find us there. We have a couple of questions where we just say like, please promise to be nice. And then you can come join us and hang out with us. And we would love to have you.
Yeah. And know if you come and you promise to be nice and you're not nice, we will
Oh,
have no
you're gone.
problem showing you the
Yeah.
door. Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
exactly. Yeah.
I have to
We
say,
like to, we like a peaceful space. Yeah.
yeah, it's October. It's just the very beginning of October when we're recording, and I cannot wait. I'm planning to put a post up in the Facebook group asking people to show their family Halloween costumes. I super get into that, and I love to see what other people have done. Like that's one of my we do a family costume. I'm really looking forward to that thread. So if you're
Is it a
listening,
surprise, like what your theme is for this year? You're not going to tell us yet or what?
yeah, I don't think I'm going to tell you. I think I'm
Okay.
just
I
going to
like
show
it.
the picture. Yeah. We'll do a reveal once we're actually in our costume. So, yeah, I'm excited. But I mean, we've done some fun things. I'll put pictures up in the group. It's going to be there.
Yes, you should do
Yeah.
like a countdown, like
Oh, yeah.
Halloween's like what's that, like the Ghost of Christmas Past, like all like
Yeah.
like Halloween past.
Yeah. Yep.
So yeah, come and hang out with us. I mean, even just sometimes, like I was watching something the other day. I don't know if you saw it, Amanda, that show Penelope that's on Netflix. It was amazing, and it was like this. I was watching it, and I was sitting there going, "This is unschooling." Right. This is 100% what interest led, true in-depth interest led learning looks like. It was a beautiful example. And so, sometimes we kind of have these conversations that kind of weave together, culture and life and homeschooling and all that good kind of stuff. So come and hang out with us. We would absolutely love it. If you would like to read along with us for the Danish Way of Raising Teens, check the description for the link. But in the meantime, happy homeschooling.
Yeah. Have a great one.